Bespoke point charts, a calendar circle chart. And this is what it looks like. We have our breakdown by regions, so central, east, south and west. We have every day of the year plotted as individual points. And we have the month giving us a sense of color. So each color in the circle represents an individual month. And the size represents the sale amount. This allows us to quickly identify an individual point of interest. So, with this said, let's open up Tableau desktop and let's get building. So let's get started by loading our data source. Let's go to Microsoft Excel. Let's select our Superstore data source. Let's bring in our orders tab. The data has now loaded. Let's go to sheet 1 and let's start building out our data visualization. Before that, I want us to create two control parameters. Right click on a blank space, go to create parameters. The first one I'm going to call is depth. I'm going to give that a default value of 7 or current value of 7. And I'm going to create a second parameter which I want to call distance from center. I'm going to give this an integer value of 5. So this is from center, defines how much of a gap in between your circle. The depth indicates how many different rings do we have. So for example, as we're dealing with weeks, or I want to show weeks, we are going to have 7 rings. Let's carry on. Let's start creating our calculations. We don't need to use data densification, which is a good thing, but we are going to use table calculations. Let's right click in a blank space, create calculated field, and let's call this one index. We're going to type index -1. Now we're going to create our date item. So let's create a calculated field. We are going to call this date item. Let's put EC in front because it is going to be a table calculation. And I want this to be index divided by depth. And I want to wrap this around or cast this as an integer to floor the expression. So that's our first step. Let's click apply and OK. Now we're going to build a very quick data visualization for you. Let's take order date. Actually, before that, let's create 2 more calculations. Go to create calculated field. Let's call this one X. We are going to type sine of radians and we're going to put TC date item inside that. Let's click OK. Let's right click on X and select duplicate. Let's edit the X copy. Let's rename this to Y. And instead of having sine, let's change this to cos. Let's click apply. Let's click OK. Let's take the order date, put it into filters and select years. And let's filter this to the latest year that we have, 2020. Pretty good. Let's start building out. I want to take region and drop it into columns. I want us to take X, drop it into columns as well. Take Y and drop that into rows. So we're building our data visualization. I want us to take order date and drop that into detail. As you can see, by default, it would be as a year. I want us to right click on this and select exact date. Really good so far. I want us to right click on X, go to compute using and select order date. Aha, you can see that we've now got our points. I want us to right click on Y, go to compute using and do the same. As you can see, it's not quite giving us what we want. There's a few things missing. Firstly, I want us to take order date and drop this onto rows. Don't worry about error. Right click on order date and make sure that show missing values is selected. Now I want us to take order date and drag that back onto details. You can see there was some missing dates and therefore these were not all lining up, but now we've fixed that. I wish you could actually select show missing values here, but for some reason it doesn't exist. So we have to drag it to the rows first. Now, as you can see, it's getting there. It looks pretty good, but now it's crunched up. We don't want that. So let's create a calculated field. This one we are going to call spacing. 360, that's the number of degrees in total of a circle, divided by 53 weeks. Again, let's give some space at the end of our data visualization. Click OK. Let's modify the X and the Y to give this additional spacing between the circle points. So, to do that, we are going to multiply the TC date item by spacing. Oh, looking fancy. Let's do the same for Y. Multiply by spacing. As you can see, we now have our circle. It's getting there. However, what you might notice is that, for example, each of these points now have 7 points because they have all the days in that specific week. We want them to be pushed out away from the center, so we need to create a distance calculation. So let's do that now. Let's call it TC distance. What we want to do is, let's say, index, and we want to use the modulo and include depth there. So if you're not familiar with this calculation, please do look up modulo. It's very useful for these type of situations. We also use this in our waffle. Let's modify our X and our Y. Let's add multiplier by distance and see what happens. Ooh. Let's edit Y and do the same. There you go. Have a look at that. So now we've created our circle. The one thing that is still annoying is that we have a lot of stack up in the center. We want some additional distance, and that's where our distance from center comes in. So let's edit our distance calculation. And let's add to this distance from center. Now you can see we've created a little bit of room, some room to breathe, and this is very useful for us at the moment. So let's show our depth parameter and let's show our distance calculation. So if we change our depth to 10, you can see what we've done here. We now have 10 dots, i.e. 10 different rings. Distance from center, we edit that to 10. We're creating more space in between. So you could play with both of these if you want to. But let's leave our depth at 7. Let's leave our distance as 5 for now. Now what we want to do is start building out, really kind of focusing on getting the look and feel right. So what I want to do now is take order date and drop it into color. Doesn't do much because it defaults to year. Let's change this to month. Now you can see that January, February, March, nice and simple. I want to change the mark type to a filled circle. Let's move the month here, shall we? So you can see it's getting there. And now it's really about us. Let's make some cosmetic tweaks. Let's take cells and drop it into size. I don't really want to see the scale, so I'm going to hide that. But let's increase the size a tad, shall we? Let's also look at the transparency And again, this is all cosmetic now. We have the basics, so you can do what you fancy. But let's hide the y-axis. Let's hide the x-axis. The region label we don't need. Let's call this our calendar circle chart. Let's right click on the canvas. Let's go to format. Let's go to format lines, and again I wish there was a remove all button, but let's remove all of these just for prosperity. Let's go to format borders. I'm going to remove my row divider. I'm going to change my column divider to dashed lines, and here we have it. You can select your individual months. You can modify your distance from center. You can increase your depth. And the key here is that you can play with this visualization as much as you want. If you come back to the main, if you disable presentation, let's show this filter. Single value, and let's remove the possibility to select all. So now you can really play with your data, and as you can see, we've created a very simple, very fun calendar circle chart. I'm going to bring this at the top. Now if we go back to presentation mode, this is what we have. You can now say, what is this red item? Again, we can modify our tooltips. You can say, what is this item? We can add as many filters as we want to. But yes, I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, with all of these tutorials, we've put our grid upon the screen, then we've modified, we've added color, size, we've modified our mark types to create this effect. So, if you need to, go through this tutorial again, otherwise, look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.